off with some geography. We got Lake Nyos. How can a lake kill 1,700 people? Well, though it sounds too insane to be true, it did indeed happen. Located in West Africa, the lake itself is deceptively beautiful. However, on August 21st, 1986, a mysterious cloud burst from the lake. It flooded towards the village and suffocated 1,700 people and animals. Nothing survived the event. The reason this happened is because beneath the water there is a pocket of magma that leaks carbon dioxide into the lake. The CO2 stays dissolved in the water due to the pressure of the 650 feet of water on top of the magma secretions. Crazy, so kind of like a pop bottle with an invisible lid. Until one day, that lid popped. On that day, the lake abruptly depressurized and the CO2 exploded into the air, causing the devastating event. Today, pipes are used to siphon the CO2 out from the bottom of the lake in order to prevent this from happening again, but imagine when it did happen, it must have felt like some kind of magical grim occurrence. For sure.
Number 9. Father Neptune. This might come as a surprise, but Great Britain didn't always have the strongest navy on earth. Henry VIII is considered to be the father of the Royal Navy. He commissioned the construction of many ships, largely increasing the size of the navy. He did his best to find the best shipbuilders and use tax money to fund the project. He also began to set up naval infrastructure and culture, with schools of navigation being opened and set away lands for docks to improve the effectiveness of the navy. And this was a great start, because when you fast forward a few hundred years, Great Britain had the strongest navy in the world, and that is what helped them conquer so many lands.
8. Unsinkable Sam. On a happier note, this is the kind of story that makes people believe that cats have 9 lives. Unsinkable Sam was the nickname for a cat who survived several shipwrecks during World War II. His tale begins aboard a German warship called the Bismarck. Among the 2,200 soldiers was a black and white cat that somehow snuck aboard. One day, the Bismarck was decimated during an attack, and while the HMS Cossack was looking for survivors, they saw Oscar the cat, name of the time, seeking refuge on a plank, like Jack from the Titanic. They hauled him aboard, but then several months later, the Cossack would be decimated. That's shipwreck number 2. This time it was the HMS Ark Royale who spotted him and was then dubbed the name Unsinkable Sam. And then, shipwreck number 3. Months later, as you can guess, the Royale was torpedoed, and once again, Sam was saved by the HMS Legion of the British Royal Fleet. Finally, this seafaring feline retired to land and later died in 1955. Number 7. Nellie Bly. Nellie Bly is a woman right out of a Jules Verne novel. In fact, you would think so if she hadn't met the man himself. In 1889, Nellie Bly took on a record-breaking voyage by traveling around the world in just 72 days. Her means of travel included a train, a steamship, a rickshaw, horse, and donkey. Her goal was to beat the fictional record set by Verne's hero Phileas Fogg in his 80-day Odyssey. An event like this already appeared as a myth to the men of the time. Her editor at the New York World nearly refused to send her because her gender would make the trip impossible. No one but a man could do this, he told her. Very well, she replied. Start the man and I'll start the same day for some other newspaper and beat him. He backed down, and eventually Nellie was on her way, turning fiction into reality. Number 6. The Black Museum. No, I'm not talking about the Black Museum episode of Black Mirror, but honestly, not too far off. People have done some pretty vicious things to their enemies. There's a long list, but imagine turning your enemies into a permanent dinner guest. Because that's exactly what Ferdinand I of Naples actually did. Though everyone thought he was going to be a great king, he actually ended up being pretty psychotic. He would invite his enemies over for dinner, and while they gorged on pheasant, he would take them out, either the old-fashioned way, or literally throw them out of a window. He would then retrieve and dress the bodies and stage them. He called it his Black Museum and would invite new acquaintances to view it so they would know exactly who they were dealing with, so not to mess with him. What a psycho.
Number 5. Bloody Mary. Her name isn't Sweet Mary, is it? Yeah, that's right. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. Oh, we're good. Okay, just checking. Most known for attempts at reversing the English Reformation, tried her very best to restore the papal order, and had over 300 people burned at the stake for being so-called heretics, which, if you ask me, sounds like the worst possible way to die. Mary was overshadowed by her sister, which, now coming to think of it, could be the reason why she was so pale. I'm just kidding, but being stuck in someone's shadow sucks. Kinda makes me mad, actually. All of a sudden I want to burn someone alive. Anybody got a match?
Number 4. Simo Hayha. Hayha. This is actually kind of a plug for a short film I'm looking to raise funds for. Check out my Instagram to learn more. But his story is incredible and it's so unbelievable. Simo Hayha's story sounds like something straight out of a movie, except it actually happened. A humble Finnish farmer who became the Soviets' nightmare in World War II. He is widely regarded as one of the most accomplished and skilled snipers in history. The Winter War began in Finland in 1939 after Russia decided that it was time to regain some territory. They thought it was going to be easy. But soon they came to fear the man who would be known as the White Death. He was trained as a sniper at a young age, didn't want to take human lives though, so he just became a farmer, but the lives of his countrymen were at stake. The Winter War lasted just over 100 days, and within that time, Simo hit as many as 500 men, his personal best being 40 confirmed hits in one day. Some people estimate that it was over 800 people. In March 1940, he was hit in the jaw by a counter-sniper, leaving him in a coma for 11 days. But when he awoke, however, the Russians surrendered. That is poetic justice. Number 3, Alexander the Great. How did this guy exist? Was he the son of Zeus? The case is so convincing that even Alexander believed it himself. During the 15 years of his conquest, starting from his first victory when he was 18, Alexander never lost a battle. He was so prolific in battle that his strategies are still studied to this day. Before Alexander entered Egypt, they had been under Persian rule for just over 200 years. Through his incredible prowess and lightning-quick decision-making, Alexander defeated them. Egypt was so happy they even claimed him as their pharaoh. While he was in Egypt, however, Alexander decided to make the long trek to visit the shrine of Zeus Ammon. According to the man himself, he was guided there by ravens, and it even rained during his journey, which was interpreted as a blessing. When he got there, the priest named him a son of Zeus. Now, if that doesn't make this guy sound like a myth, then I don't know what will. Number 2, Bastille. Bastille is the Morrigan in my mind. She is Xena, warrior princess. This woman was so ferocious, she was called the scourge of the Roman Empire. Yeah, that's right, this queen took on the Roman Empire. At the time Rome was invading the south of Britain, Queen Bastille ruled the Iceni tribe of East Anglia, along her husband King Prasutagus. Though her early days remain mostly a mystery, she remains among the canon of heroes who defended the British Isles. She was fearsome to behold, with flaming red hair and a gaze so sharp it could cut glass. She and her husband fought against the Romans until his death, after which the Romans drove straight to take her on. They attacked her daughters publicly, which, like Mother Bear, not a good idea, after which she toured in a chariot rallying the people in rebellion. She sacked 3 Roman cities and took no prisoners. She annihilated the 9th Legion when she took out their entire relief force. Sadly though, Bastille fell after a vicious battle, but her name echoes in the halls of heroes. And last but not least, Richard, Saladin, and the Third Crusade. Just the Crusades in general are just unbelievable. Never in history have 2 rulers been so equally matched. Currently I'm reading Warriors of God, Richard the Lionheart and Saladin and the Third Crusade by James Rustin, and the fact that everything I've read so far isn't just the next Game of Thrones novel astounds me. These 2 never met because Saladin believed that kings should not go to war if they had met, but because they were fighting over the Holy Land, war was kind of inevitable. But while Saladin did not engage in warfare, Richard dove right in the middle of everything. They both had such incredible admiration for each other that in the middle of battles, they would send each other gifts. Like, I don't understand. You killed my men. You killed my men. Here's a fruit basket. Literally happened. And another example, during the Battle of Jaffa, Richard's horse ended up being killed, and Saladin was so impressed with him that he sent him 2 new ones. 2! On top of that, Richard had taken off half of his armor before he had leapt ashore to fight. So he was basically half naked. Eventually Saladin tried to have him assassinated, but Richard was so ferocious in battle that everyone feared him. The dude was pretty much a human bulldozer. The 2 assassins ended up waking up the camp because they were fighting about who should take the guy out. Number 10, the cutting edge. So I feel like I have to start here because this really was the prima donna of the revolution. One of the reasons the French Revolution became such a bloody event was due to the guillotine. It became the primary symbol of the French Revolution as the peasants exacted revenge on the aristocracy. It became known as the National Razor and Madame la Guillotine. Prior to the events of the revolution, executions were much more violent and cruel, if you can believe that. One involved quartering, which we won't get into, but you can imagine how bad that is if you take that literally. But Dr. Joseph Guillotine, a member of the French National Assembly, argued that there should be a painless and private capital punishment, and even argued against capital punishment in general. He didn't want it to happen. So Dr. Guillotine, along with a German and a harpsichord maker, Tobias Schmidt, invented the first prototype for the death machine. From there, the rest was history. It is estimated over 40,000 people were executed à la raison during the Reign of Terror. Pretty bad for a guy who really didn't want it to happen, but hey, at least it was painless. If the blade was sharp. If it wasn't, ugh. Number 9, the Salem Witch Trials. If you follow me on MA, you just know how much I hate the Salem Witch Trials. I hate them so much, okay? It's an event in history that is so inconceivably stupid, it's hard to believe it actually happened. The Salem Witch Trials occurred in Massachusetts between 1692 and 1693, where more than 200 people were accused of witchcraft and 20 were put to death. It all started because the daughter of Reverend Paris, Elizabeth, who was 9, and his niece, Abigail Williams, same age, started having fits. Another girl, Ann Putnam, age 11, started having them as well. The supernatural was blamed, and soon the girls began accusing everyone they could, mostly people the town didn't like. Basically, if you confessed and you wanted to be saved, then you weren't executed, but if you were accused and didn't confess, you were killed. The paranoia was so bad that once you were accused, you couldn't escape this guilt they put on you. It was insane. But after the paranoia finally subsided, the colony admitted that they probably made a mistake and compensated the families. Like, yeah, oops, might have gotten a little carried away there. Wow, whew, I got excited, sorry guys. Here's some money. The Salem Witch Trials today represent what happens when paranoia rules a courtroom and the whole thing still beguiles the world even 300 years later. Number 8, the tennis court oath. You'd think it would be like at a pub or on the street. Why I think that, I don't know, but it wasn't. One of the earliest acts of defiance in the French Revolution took place on a tennis court of all places. To say that Louis XVI was ill-equipped to handle the financial debt that his father and his grandfather built prior to his reign is kind of, well, it's an understatement. He had no clue. He made a desperate attempt in 1789 to address the economic issues by assembling the Estates Generales. It was a national assembly with 3 factions, each one representing either the nobles, the clergy, and the commoners. The Third Estates, which is the commoners, had the most members and declared themselves the National Assembly. There was a long list of overdue grievances, and they declared that they would force a new constitution on the king. Initially things were looking up as Louis legalized the assembly, but he locked them out of the damn meeting. So they moved to an indoor tennis court and took an oath to never disband until a new written constitution was formed for France. But very soon after that, they stormed the Bastille. But we'll get to the Bastille later. Number 7, give us bread! The French Revolution very much erupted due to the financial distress of the people. But the tipping point was the moment bread became unattainable to the common Parisian. Bread is a huge thing in France, and it was a huge kind of staple meal for every Parisian. Marie Antoinette's famous misquoted response to the people asking for bread was, "Let them eat cake." Though it's debated whether she actually said that, it does summarize this yeasty flashpoint in history. They should have known better. In 1529, riots over grain and the Great Rebellion led to thousands of peasants destroying houses of the rich, all in the name of grain. But they didn't listen to their history, they made it worse. The king was counseled by the physiocrats since the 1760s, who firmly believed that the wealth of the nation was derived solely from the value of the land. Therefore, agricultural products should be highly priced. So they tried to intermittently deregulate the domestic trade to introduce free trade, but needless to say, they failed so hard. They caused food shortages and skyrocketed prices, which erupted in the Flour War over 300 riots to pillage grain in 1775. Layers and layers of tensions were added, along with other economic distress and all this stuff added to the fuel of the blaze that would be later the French Revolution. Number 6, flip a coin. Now, the royal family obviously didn't go willingly to their deaths. They at first tried to escape. As I previously mentioned, bread was a big deal, and on October 5th, 1789, a large crowd of mostly women began to assemble at the markets. Why were they there? To discuss the steep price of bread. But they were dismissed, so they marched from Paris to the Palace of Versailles and stormed the place. They took out several guards and chanted over and over to the king, "Live among the people." Louis conceded, he said yeah okay, and agreed to go with them to Paris. Agreed, kind of. But meanwhile, the royal family was placed under protection, and on the night of June 1971, the nobles dressed as their servants and their servants dressed as them, and the nobles made an attempt to escape to Austria. Now, if it were 2021, the king would probably have some arrogant social media so everyone would know what he looked like, but the commoners outside didn't. They had no pictures of him, so it was the perfect disguise. But his face was on every coin in France, and it was because of this he was recognized at the border and sent back. Now we know what happened next. Number 5. Sir Adrian Cotton de Walt. Love that name. There are going to be a couple unbelievable events on this list from World War II, so just a heads up. But truth be told, the war itself is kind of hard to believe. Sir Adrian Cotton de Walt was not only a man who survived the impossible once, but he made a career out of it. He wasn't like your Blackadder general in the back with a pipe. This dude was on the front lines tossing grenades with one arm because he already lost the other. He served in the Boer War, World War I, and World War II. He survived being shot in the face, skull, hip, leg, ankle, and ear. One eye and one arm short, this enthusiastic war hero dove into the bloodshed again and again. He was seen pulling pins out of grenades and throwing them with his one good arm during Battle of the Somme. But even as a 60-year-old man, he was still a beast. His plane got shot down in April 1941, he crashed it into the Mediterranean, survived, swam all the way to shore, then he got captured by Italian soldiers, thrown into a POW camp, then he escaped, eluded capture for 8 days, but unfortunately the lack of Italian looks gave him away. He was released 2 years later, and Churchill was such a big fan of him, he made him his rep over in China. He ended up passing away peacefully at age 83. Despite hundreds of close calls with death. Number 4, the Bastille. Bastille, Bastille, Bastille. What am I talking about? It seems wrong not to mention one of the most pivotal moments in the French Revolution, the storming of the Bastille. Peasants rose up and literally stormed the most famous prison in France. But what you may not know is that they destroyed that building with their own bare hands. They tore it brick from brick because they didn't have any explosives. The Bastille was a fearsome 100 feet high, 8-towered prison that became a symbol for the tyranny of the aristocrats, so it was only natural that they would take out their anger on this place. At dawn on July 14th, a crowd armed with only muskets, swords, makeshift weapons gathered around the Bastille. Their intent was to demand the ammunition stored there from the governor of the prison, the Marquis de Lanay. He and his men were eventually overwhelmed and the people stormed it. Lanay raised a white flag and surrendered. He and his men were taken into custody, gunpowder and cannons were seized, and 7 prisoners were freed. Lanay was destroyed by the mob before he even met trial. This pivotal moment in history is celebrated as the French national holiday, even today. Number 3, Charlotte Corday, assassin of Marat. So we have established a couple things. One is that the French Revolution was bloody, relentless, and pretty terrifying. As much as it proved the statement that people shouldn't be afraid of their governments, but the other way around, Alan Moore, V for Vendetta, it wasn't a great place to be. Enter Charlotte Corday. Charlotte was a passionate supporter of the revolution, even though its main conspirators were set on killing the likes of her. Charlotte was, after all, a noblewoman, though she opposed the reign of terror. There were 2 sides to the fray, the Girondists and the Jacobins, and Charlotte fought alongside the first, the Girondists. But the Jacobins were radical and tried to kill any and all oppositionists, the Girondists included, which is why Charlotte decided that Jean-Paul Marat, leader of the Jacobins, had to be taken out. She became an assassin. While Marat was taking a bath, Charlotte stormed in. She'd bought a knife and, disguised as an informant, went in to speak with him. She said she had news. At first, she delivered on her offer and told him of the escaped Girondists. He at once said that they would be guillotined, and so she whipped out her knife and popped his bath bubbles for good. Corday knew she was going to be caught, however, and had told no one, not even her family, her plan, so they wouldn't stop her. Charlotte was guillotined July 17th, 1793 with her name attached to her dress so she would be recognized. She wrote in a letter explaining her actions, "I desire only that my head, carried through Paris, may be a rallying standard for all the friends of the law." Number 2. Public zoo. Did you know that in the middle of all that crazy turmoil and public executions, they managed to find time to open a public zoo? In 1793, the National Assembly declared that all privately owned exotic animals will be transferred to the menagerie at the Palace of Versailles, or killed, stuffed, and donated to scientists. Gladly though, the animals' lives were spared and the menagerie was reopened as a zoo. It was free to the public and peasants got to go see exotic animals for the first time. Jacques-Henri Bernardin de Saint-Pierre, the founder, passionately believed that the public should be educated about exotic animals. Now, I can't be sure how well the animals were treated, I assume it wasn't very great, but this was technically the first zoo. Number 1. Maximilien Robespierre. Now, it only seems fitting that we end this list at the end. Maximilien Robespierre started out with good intentions, but even though the revolution was about the dismantling of power, Maximilien became corrupted by it. Yes, he did topple the monarchy and put the power back to the people, but then he took it back for himself and got a little crazy, you know the whole thing. Robespierre worked as a lawyer in France and focused a lot of his cases towards the underprivileged classes. This got him a lot of popularity and he eventually rose to be the poster child of the revolution, the leader of the revolution. He became the head of public safety after Louis and Marie lost their heads and continued to accuse many members of the National Convention of treasonous and unrevolutionary activities all over the place. Remember the whole thing between the Girondists and the Jacobins? This was that. In less than a year, 300,000 people were arrested, 10,000 died in prison, and 17,000 were guillotined. I think those numbers might be slightly off, but that's kind of what the research said. One by one, he sent them all to the guillotine until he eventually was elected the president of the National Convention. Within 6 days, he passed a law that suspended the right to a public trial and to legal assistance, and by the end of that month, 1,400 were guillotined. Talk about trigger happy. Finally, the right and the left had to reunite in order to overthrow him, and he was eventually met the blade himself. Kind of crazy how full circle that is.
Number 10. Chop Chop. It's pretty difficult to talk about the Tudors without a little controversy. When you talk about King Henry VIII, for example, it's hard not to talk about him getting divorced, and how he chose to go about it. And if you didn't know, it was beheading, a lovely royal European tradition. Basically, when old Henry wasn't getting his way, or was in heat for someone else's whap, he wanted a divorce, and sometimes the church just wouldn't grant him the separation he was looking for. So, instead, he separated his wife's head from her body, after accusing poor Anne Boleyn of adultery. Poor Anne Boleyn.
Number 9. The national anthem. You know what's funny about going to theater school is that the more you learn, the more your teachers are like, hey, if something bad happens to you, you can use it. It's fuel for your art. Which is immediately what I thought of when I heard this story. Which is why, to me, it kind of makes sense that the origins of the French national anthem happened during the French Revolution. They used their pain to make something good. Going through something dramatic? Sing about it. The monarchies of Europe were pretty pissed about the fact that they were killing a bunch of their friends and loved ones, so they formed a coalition to defeat the resistance and restore the monarchy. The French Baron Philippe Friedrich Dietrich requested that Rouget de Lille, another French officer, compose a song that would rally the troops. So he wrote the first anthem, called Chant de guerre pour l'armée de Rhin, which translates to War for the Army of Rhin. Volunteers carried the anthem all through the streets of Paris as they marched on the capital. The song title got subbed out for the simpler one called the Marseillaise, which became the Republic's anthem in 1795. And now, even today, it is the national anthem of France.
8. Fitzroy and sister. Royal families have weird bloodlines. I'm sure you guys know that by now, but I mean, come on, it's a little crazy. Looking at a royal family tree is like trying to decipher some of my high school essays. You gotta look at it for a while before you know what's going on. Sorry, Mrs. M. We all know that sometimes royals like to do weird things in their love lives, like marrying your sister or your brother to keep the bloodline pure and royal. But forcing your kids to marry because you need a male heir pronto is messed up. Yeah, at one point Henry VIII in his portly glory wanted an heir so bad he was going to make one of his many kids from his many mistresses marry one another. Thank God his son Fitzroy rushed into another marriage, most likely to avoid marrying his half-sister. Why cross the street when you can cross the hall is probably something Henry thought, and you know what? I sent a telegram to the chief last night, it got back to me, told me it wasn't it. Number 7. The Royal Crane. I relate to this one. Being a big boy is hard sometimes. People might want to pick on you in the schoolyard. You get excited at the sight of food. and the worst noise known to humankind is the Fitness Gram Pacer test is a multi-stage aerobic capacity test that progressively gets more difficult as it continues. Oh yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about. But besides being an overweight teen in high school, King Henry VIII had his own issues. While not being a beefy boy in his youth, once he had become the tyrannical king he's remembered for, well, he wasn't doing P90X. Being the faux chonker that he was, poor King Henry could no longer mount his noble steed without assistance. That assistance would come in the form of a crane, would hoist the old boy up and into his saddle. Number 6. You up? I know I'm mad dissing King Henry here, and I know there's other tutors, but this guy's just really messed up. Here's something for our younger audience. We've all been there. So, the King of England had a few wives. Dude must have been slick with the ladies, right? Wrong. Honestly, dude's super cringe. I believe the term used for a man like this would be a waste you'd. I bring this up because the love letters he wrote to his mistresses are on the same equivalent as the you up text, which the ladies of my generation will tell you is the most romantic thing a guy could say, especially on a school night at 3 a.m. In one of the love letters to his dearly decapitated Anne Boleyn, he protests the urge to kiss her duckies, which you can probably tell what part of her body that is. It's this part.
Number 5, last words. While she was alive, Marie Antoinette was abhorred, absolutely detested, they hated her. But funny enough, today she's incredibly well loved. Historians believe that due to rumors and hatred of the time, her character was misinterpreted. What do I think? Well, she was the product of the aristocracy that pretty much poisoned their own well. She was a bystander. But one of the moments that leads people to believe in her kinder nature was her last words. As Marie Antoinette walked up to the guillotine on October 16, 1793, she stepped on the foot of her executioner by accident. Some say it was something else, but either way, her last words were reported as, "I'm sorry."
Number 4. Hey Alexa, can you translate this for me? Being a tutor is a big deal, right? And being on the royal throne of England is also a big deal, right? So obviously our majesty can read and write in English, right? Well, no, actually, he cannot. A more forgettable member of the Tudors is Philip II of Spain. He was the husband of Mary I and was officially recognized as the King of England. To not do so would be considered to be treason. The man also had his face on some coins, and if that's not official, I don't know what is. Someone put me on a coin. However, the biggest irony and the most messed up thing, if you really think about it, is that Philip did not speak or read a word of English. Oftentimes, when he was tending to matters of state, documents had to be printed in either Latin or Spanish in order for him to understand or even act on them. Honestly, if he can get away with that, then I'm proclaiming right now, I'm the king of Iceland. I don't speak Icelandic, but I'm the king. What's up, guys? How you doing? I'm the king now. Number 3, Rebellion Crusher. Henry VII, turns out, wasn't such a great guy either. Having taken the throne after Richard III fell in battle, not everyone was so cool with him taking the reins, as he had a lot of rebellion crushing to do. People were upset. Suppress the rebellion. Can't trust your own court? Suppress them too. As it turns out, he was kind of a mama's boy, and his mother would often influence his political doings. But the worst thing he did was lock up a cousin of his enemies who was only 10 years old at the time. He stayed in this tower locked up until his manual unaliving day at 24. It's just a nice family. Gosh. Number 2, lethal R&D. Sometimes when you're at the top of your game, people want to take you down. A common assassination method in ye olde times was poison. So to prevent that from happening, King Henry and many kings before him had someone testing food for him. But unlike other kings, King Henry was not just testing his food, but his bed. Yeah, kings were worried that simply touching some poisons was enough to send you to the kingdom in the sky. So the poor sap who made the king's bed in the morning had to pucker up and kiss his bed, just to make sure that no one had put anything fishy in his bed. The cushion on his chamber pot was also checked before a royal bowel movement. That is so disgusting, okay. Kiss my toilet, peasant! Check for poisons. So did you have pheasant last night? You know what I mean? Number 1, face off. After Queen Elizabeth's face was scarred from smallpox, she wanted the Maybelline look again. Too bad that modern makeup companies didn't exist, because the alternative was just straight messed up. Her makeup was a lovely smelling concoction of vinegar and lead. I'll say that again, vinegar and lead. I don't even know how a human would come to even combine those two together. Lead being lead is toxic, and after being constantly applied to the face like that, well, she didn't live as long as Betty White did. Rest in peace, Betty White. Also, vinegar. Bathing was an issue back in the day, and having vinegar put on your face every day, That just must have made her pillow smell like roses. I feel bad for the guys that kiss her bed. Ooh.